Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christelle Rinn, and I'm the COO here at HRLocker. One of the things we're going to go through in today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on how you can manage both your employees and your volunteers in HRLocker. So we're going to be focusing on how you can go through the end-to-end hiring process from both an employee perspective as well as bring your volunteers on board. How you can make sure that you're GDPR compliant, again, both with your direct employees as well as with your volunteers. How you can manage all those training and certs. And, you know, at the moment, I suppose the world that we're living in is both hybrid and offsite workers. So how you can manage your team members out in the field, as well as if they're on multiple sites. And then specifically around the volunteer management. So a lot of companies that we've spoken to are having that issue in regards to, at the moment, there's a lot of compliance that is needed for volunteers. So if you're looking at managing the certs or policies and procedures that a volunteer needs to go through. So we'll go through that as well. And then the last bit that we'll go through then is, you know, managing your employees on a day-to-day basis. So managing your time off in lieu, your timesheets, and your annual leave as well. So we'll go through each one of those sections. And as always, we have a questions and answers section within the application. So if anybody has any questions throughout the throughout the webinar, please post your question in there. And as always, I have Jenny with me today who will send me on the questions, and hopefully I can get as many answers to you as possible. But please feel free to just, you know, when I'm going through something, just post a question into the Q&A section, and I'll be delighted to answer the question if I can. So right now you can see here, I'm logged into HRLocker, and this is the dashboard within HRLocker. So I can see all my tasks here, and I'm logged in here as an administrator. So every user within HRLocker, so within your employee team or your management team or your volunteers, will get their own username and password. And they'll log in through the website into the screen that I'm looking at here now. Obviously, I'm in as an admin, so I can see all the information about everybody. But when you're logging in as an employee or volunteer, you only ever get to see the information that's applicable to yourself. So that's really important. So at no time will anybody else see any information about anybody else. So we'll start in regards to starting that employee and volunteer life cycle. So I'm logged in here and I can see all the modules here, but what we're going to go to first is we're going to go into the hire section here. And this is the actual applicant tracking side of HRLocker. So it's the start of your employee journey. I'll just zoom in there for you a little bit here. Okay, so a lot of the times when we're talking to people, the questions that we have is in regards to, you know, the jobs that they have when they're trying to recruit, both from an employee side of it, but also from a volunteer side of it as well. So some people may have that volunteer job up on their own website or even just internally, and then the other jobs they have up on job boards. So we can do both. So when we're going in here, we're going to go into the jobs here. I'm just going to change my view here because it keeps popping out. There we go. Okay, so here you see I have one job posted here. It's a sales executive job. And this job, when I'm posting it, obviously it's an employee job. So when I go in here, I want to edit this job. I can put in what type of job it's full-time. I can put in the salary, the job experience, all that kind of information. I can put in the actual job description, so the roles and responsibilities I can put in here. And I can decide if I want to display this job to the public or not. So I can decide maybe it's an internal recruitment role. But once I do that, I can put the job up here. And I can also add any forms I want here. So a lot of the roles specifically in that non-for-profit sector may have some requirements for the role. So maybe you require that people may have to have a full clean driver's license, or they may have to have some certain specific qualifications. So you can create a form, a pre-qualification form that all your employees can fill in prior to applying for the job. Once they apply, you'll get notified if the person has failed the qualification questionnaire or not. So it's an easy way to kind of filter candidates. So this job I can push up, and it's going to go up onto my website, and it's going to go up into a number of different job boards that we integrate with as well. Most specifically, we integrate with the LinkedIn job boards, Indeed, a number of different job boards here, Glassdoor, CareerJet, Monster, and Talent.com. So your jobs will straight away go out to those job boards and also go on to any of your social media. So if you're using Facebook or Twitter, again, or your LinkedIn, so this here goes onto the LinkedIn job board, but if you also want to post it onto your own LinkedIn profile as well, you can do that here. And the same can also apply for your volunteers. So you can create a volunteer job here that you can put onto your own website. You can create it, call it an actual, we'll create a job here, and we'll call it the volunteers. Now, the volunteers here, you can create whatever job title you like. So say, for example, if you're looking for perhaps the charity shop volunteers, or maybe it's frontline working or whatever volunteer, you can create the specific job title here for the volunteer. You can create the same in terms of, obviously there isn't any salary, or maybe you don't need any, perhaps any experience or anything like that. And then you can put in the job description here as well. And this can also create your funnel for your volunteer recruitment as well. So depending on if you want, you can decide, do you want to display this job to the public? If you don't want it on your website and you just want it as a link to send on to people, you just press do not display to the public. So now that you have that job there, you can then decide, okay, well, presumably the volunteers that are coming in through the pipeline for your recruitment for volunteers and your employee life cycle in terms of recruitment for that is probably going to be different. So you can decide what route each candidate is going to go through. And I'll show you this here. So in terms of custom statuses, so you can decide everybody, regardless if they're an employee or a volunteer, will come in at the arrival stage. And then you can decide, okay, for example, perhaps an employee will go through, 1, 2, 3 round interview, whatever your preference is, or telephone interview, but perhaps the volunteer status is different. So we can have here a volunteer interview. Maybe it's a telephone interview. Oops. And you can decide then what template you want to put in. So maybe it's the interview template, so we can do that. So then when you're looking at the 2 different email templates, so you have an interview template for your employees, but you're also going to have an interview template for your volunteers. So there'll be 2 different templates that you can decide what you'd want to do in there. So again, they're going down 2 different paths, managing the same system, but 2 different paths. And then depending on, for example, who's actually managing that volunteer process and the employee process. So again, I'm in here as an admin, so I get access to everything. But say, for example, if this sales job here, if I have another hiring manager working with me, I can allocate permissions for that person here to just work on this job with me. And the same can be done for the volunteer job. So say, for example, if it's your volunteer coordinator, they will come in here, put up you would give them access to that one volunteer job, or if you have a number of volunteer jobs, but those volunteer jobs, you'd give them access to that. So you wouldn't give them access to the entire recruitment side of things in terms of your full-time employee roles, but you'd give them access to the volunteer database. So that as the volunteer coordinator, they'd be able to look at all the volunteers that have applied. They'd be able to look at the database of volunteers here as well. And they'd be able then to, I suppose, bring them through whatever interview process you have or whatever way you onboard them. So again, it's important to decide, okay, yes, they're in the same system in terms of your recruitment. However, you need to decide on kind of splitting them up in terms of what process they each go through and who's responsible for that process. So a lot of the times the recruitment for the volunteers might fall under, wouldn't be a HR issue, it would be under the volunteer coordinator, depending on the size of your non-for-profit, or maybe the HR does it all. So it does depend. And again, you can decide on whatever works for yourselves. So once you've gone through this process, and hopefully you're getting loads of volunteer applications, you're also getting loads of employee applications, you decide to actually onboard them. So I'm going to show you here, there's a candidate. So we'll show Adam here. So he's applied for the role. I can see all the emails that have gone out to him here. So from a GDPR perspective, you want to keep all the information in one spot. So if you're getting loads of applications both from an employee's perspective and a volunteer perspective, you don't want to have all these CVs in everybody's inboxes, because you want them all in one spot, so you know that they're all secure and they're not going out to loads of different people. So, and you also want to make sure that that all the communication is done from one spot, so that you can know well, if John was having a conversation with James, what were they talking about? So you can kind of see everything in one spot. So you'll see all the emails here, and you'll see here, you'll be able to bring them through that process here. So there's that volunteer process here. And then once you hire or you onboard, so you're going to bring on your employee or your volunteer into HRLocker, this is where you're really going to start your onboarding process. And again, obviously the onboarding process is going to be different for both an employee and a volunteer. A lot of synergies, and so you can set up different workflows for the two. So we're going to bring, first of all, once you press the hire button, it brings it. I'm just going to go back here so I can show you. Okay, once you bring the hired button, it brings them into HRLocker. Now, certain things, again, will be applicable for an employee. Certain things will be applicable for a volunteer. So number of holidays per year. Obviously, your volunteers aren't getting holidays, but your employees will be. The start date, so when they're starting in the company with yourselves, and sending the invitation email now. So the nice thing about inviting either an employee or a volunteer into the system now is the invitation email will go out to probably their Gmail account or their Hotmail account, whatever they're using, but you can set an onboarding workflow that they can start to, sign those documents or upload those certs, do some prior training, whatever it is that you require them to do prior to them actually starting work. Or if you would prefer that they actually they don't have access to HRLocker until the day that they start, the day that they come in, you just don't send the invitation email now. So whatever is your own preference. So once we onboard them, they're going to come into this onboarding office, which we have created. Now, in the onboarding office, if you can think about it, that it's basically just a little bubble for all your employees or anybody who's pre-boarding. So they're onboarding, they're coming in, they're pre-employment or pre-volunteer stage. They live in this bubble, so nobody else in the company can see them, and they have to do certain tasks before you can move them into the next stage. So when you're bringing somebody in, it's important that you think of, okay, so again, we're talking about two different onboarding processes. So from an employee perspective, they're going to come in here, first of all, into the directory, which is where all your employee database is going to be. So you go into the directory, they'll be in the onboarding office because that's where they've come in. So they haven't actually been allocated an office yet. They're in this little onboarding office. So, and you need to kind of, I suppose, start filling out their database. So we'll go here to Adam. Adams, he's the first person here. So from an employee perspective, you're going to decide, okay, when's their start date, how many annual leave days or hours per year they have. So we have both different options. So if you have people who are accruing leave, so for example, every time they submit a timesheet, it's multiplied by an 8% rule or whatever the percentage is, or you can just have that person who's getting 25 days a year or whatever it is. Or you can have the person who's getting 150 hours per year. So whatever it is, you can have a combination. Or in the volunteer side of it, they're going to be getting zero entitlement. Their job title, their job description, the office or department. So when they come in, they'll be sitting in this onboarding office here. Okay, and until they finish all their onboarding process, all their training certs or signing their documents, you won't be bringing them into the actual office until they're finishing that. Excuse me. And then the departments. So these are completely customizable. So we'll work with you with these. And obviously the departments you can have, you can have your frontline workers, whatever it is, or your volunteers. So you can decide what structure you want to do. You can either have your volunteers as an office or a number of offices, or you can have your volunteers as a specific department and put them into different offices, whatever works for yourselves, whatever your own company structure is. And then the payroll ID and payroll, again, depending on what you're using HRLocker for. If you are requiring to take the data out of HRLocker and input it into your payroll, that's when you're going to be talking about your payroll ID and things that if you're not, you leave it off and you don't, those won't be there for you. Okay. So once you fill out all this information, that's the first part of it. The employee, again, or volunteer will get their email to say, come into HRLocker and fill out their personal details. Again, all in a secure GDPR way. Nobody else sees their data. You decide who gets to see their data. So they'll come in here, put in their date of birth, what their address is, and their emergency contacts. So again, important both from a volunteer perspective, and an employee perspective. So employees obviously are going to be filling in this tax information and the payroll information, but volunteers not relevant, but emergency contacts relevant for the volunteer. terms of employment, again, relevant for both the employment type here. From an employee perspective, you're going to be putting in what their contract is, but from a volunteer, their employee type, you're going to be putting them in as a volunteer. So, you know, really completely depending on your own company setup, that you can decide on whether you need to be having probation period end dates, who actually needs to be copied in on that probation period. So whether it's HR or IT or wherever it's going to be. And then maybe you have somebody in just for a contract, or maybe a volunteer is just coming in for 2 months or something like that. You can put the end date here, and that's when the system will lock them out at the end of the system. So again, depending on whatever way you guys are working. Comps and bends, again, obviously only applicable for your salaried people. Your reviews and references, same. But these 3 sections here are a nice little update we put into HRLocker. So the right to work, which is for those employees who have visas. So you can decide on the different visas, so you can track them here. An employee can upload the copy of the visa here, and it's also a nice way to track on when they're going to expire, just so you get notification of the renewal. The background check, important when you're, you see here I have the different Garda vetting. So it's a nice way to, I suppose, track your Garda vetting. So if you've got that done for employees and there's an expiration date, or if you require employees to do the email, they can come in here and say that they've done it. And once it comes through, obviously there's always that manager approval process here. So the manager will come in here and validate the record to say, yes, that person has been Garda vetted. I need to be reminded in 7 years' time that they need to do it again, or whatever it is, and whatever other background checks that you require of people. The pensions, again, for employees only. That's for people just to be opting in or out of the pension, and they can see here what pension they've opted in for. And then these last 2 sections here, and don't forget as well, all these sections here, if pensions aren't applicable, you turn it off. If the right to work, if you don't have if you don't have anybody in a visa, you turn that off. So you can set this up to whatever it is that you need for your own company. And the same goes with the COVID vaccine status tracker. It's completely up to the individual company. Right now, we're being advised that you can track in terms of your frontline workers. So you can turn that on for people who it is applicable for and who you are allowed to ask that information for. If it's not, turn it off if it's not relevant to you guys. And then the permissions here, again, that's really important side of the permissions is deciding on what your managers can and can't see. So say, for example, if you're happy for the volunteer coordinator to be able to see all that volunteer information, you give them access to that, whereas maybe other managers shouldn't have access to that. So you can build that up yourselves and what way that works. So once you have all that set up from an employee database and a volunteer database, you have all their information that you require. We start to look at, okay, well, what do they require in terms of from a job perspective, and also what do I require them to digitally sign as well from a company perspective. So the first place we're going to look at here is the HR documents section. So right in the HR documents section, you can publish all these documents to people in terms of what you need to be digitally signed. So there could be your employee handbooks, your contracts, your health and safety documents. I have here social distancing guidelines, hand washing policy, employee handbook, fire safety documents, or whatever documents that you require people to sign, you put them up here and the employee will digitally sign them, and you'll have a record of who signed and who hasn't signed. So the important thing to remember here is that when you're publishing a document, you can decide where it goes and hopefully kind of alleviate some of the work for you. So say, for example, if you have documents that should only go to employees, say, for example, you have an employee handbook and you have a volunteer handbook, you obviously just publish the employee handbook to employees and the volunteer handbook to volunteers. So, depending on what the requirement is. And that's here, you can publish and you can decide what office they go to or what department they go to, or even just down to the individual user. So if there's an individual contract, you can apply that just down to the individual user and they can sign the document here as well. So when you're creating the workflow here, when people are onboarded, you can obviously, presumably most companies would have an array of documents that every single employee has to sign. So you'd publish them all here, and then regardless, every single employee who is added into this office will be asked to sign that document. So, kind of alleviate some of the work for you in terms of that onboarding workflow. The other nice thing in terms of the onboarding side of it is the CPD, which is the training records. So if you think of this, you need to decide again on regards to both from a volunteer and employee perspective. When you have a volunteer joining your organization, what training do you require them to have? So say, for example, I've recently started some training in the local GA club, and there's 4 or 5 different training courses that I've had to do in order to be able to volunteer, as well as my Garda vetting. There's different child protection, safety, courses that I've had to do. So you'd come in here and you would assign them to people, and you give them information in regards to where they need to go to find that information to log on to the course, basically. And then once the person has done the course, the person yourself, so either the manager or the employee or volunteer, will get a copy of that cert, and they can add the record here. So they'd upload a copy of the cert, put in an expiration date if applicable, put in the training date, and they'd upload that cert, and a notification will go out to whoever their actual training manager is. So the training manager could be their line manager, could be the volunteer coordinator, whoever it is who's responsible for making sure that training's being done. The manager will come in here and validate the cert. So they go, yeah, I've seen it, happy that Christelle has done that training, and tick it off. So if you think about again, employer or volunteer has come into HRLocker, you've set up their you've set up their employee record or volunteer record, you put in all the parameters around that. You've set up all the documents that they require to sign your health and safety documents, everything else. They've pre-signed everything, they digitally accepted them. And then you've also gone into the CPD side of it, so that's your training records. So you've gone through all that, so all their training certs are uploaded all in one spot, and you're managing all their expiration dates. So from that aspect of getting the person on board, they've got all their information there and ready, and it's all been approved all in one spot. Again, very important in terms of a GDPR perspective is that you've set up the parameters and that only the people who need to see that information can see that information, and it's stored all here in HRLocker. So now they've started, you're going to move them out of the onboarding office and move them into the actual office that they're in, whether that's the volunteer office or sales or marketing, whatever it is. And then you start to manage them on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things is, so I'm going to show you time on and time off, and from a perspective in regards to an employee first, and then I'll discuss how some companies are using that for their volunteers as well. So in regards to the time on section, so these are your timesheets. So we have a number of different timesheets, and I'm really happy to go through these each individually with people if they have any questions about them. So we have timesheets that people can clock in and out to. So we have an app or a tablet that you can put at the door, or an app that you can download onto somebody's mobile phone that they can clock in and out. There's a GPS location into it as well. So if people are going into a number of different places and you're required to see where they are from a lone working perspective, you can get them to clock in and out in regards to getting their GPS location as well. That's one side of things. Or you can just do an honesty-based timesheet where the person can come into their timesheet and just fill in their hours. So by default, their timesheet will be filled in with their work pattern that you've given them. So it's probably 9 to half 5 or whatever it is that they work Monday to Friday. And by default, they can come in and maybe if they work late on a Friday, they can change that to 6:30, or maybe they've had to come in on Saturday for some charity event. They can put in the extra time there as well. So you can start. So you can depending on what you require from your employees and volunteers, is you decide what timesheet you'd like them to do. So, for example, if you're doing the honesty-based timesheet where they're just filling in the hours that they're doing, they can also have this project section here. So this is a nice way, for example, if you're claiming down grants or any fundraising or anything like that, you can start to, people can divide their time and what sections that they're working on. And you can see basically how many hours or how much it's costing you in each section, or if you have to claim back money or anything like that, you can pull a report down to see, well, Christelle worked 60 hours here and Jenny worked 10 hours here, that kind of thing. So that's a nice way here too. So when you want to bring it in again for your employee side of things, depending on what way your company works in regards to time off in lieu, you can decide on whether you want to actually use the timesheet to process the time off in lieu. So when you're setting up a timesheet, so I'm here with Liz McMahon's timesheet, and I can decide, okay, she works 35 hours a week, and every time she goes over 35 hours a week, her time off in lieu starts to clock up, and I'll just show you here in the time off screen here. So Liz McMahon, who I'm in here now, she's on accrued leave. So what that means is every single time she submits her timesheet, it's multiplied by 8% to accrue leave. So you can, and that's completely up to yourself. You can set that person to have 20 days, whatever is applicable. Liz obviously has never taken holidays before because she's carried over 35 days, so she's had a huge amount. But let's have a look at the time off in lieu here. So basically what this does is every single time Liz submits a timesheet and she goes over her default 35 hours, it starts to clock up hours here in her time off in lieu little graph here. So then, and obviously there's a management approval here as well. So that once the manager approves the timesheet, the time off in lieu hours clock up here. So then you guys decide, you build up this types of annual leave here. Again, obviously I've got the types of leave being the mandatory employment types of leaves. From a volunteer perspective, you're not going to be putting in carers leave or flex time or jury duty or anything like that in here. You're not going to have those options. But from an employee perspective, you're going to have those options here for the employee. And then they can decide if they want to take out from the time off in lieu section. And once they request from the time off in lieu section, it comes out of this little box here. So if they request annual leave, it comes out of this little box here. And if they requesting time off in lieu, it comes out of this. Again, always a management intervention. So if somebody requests the time off, it goes to their manager and the manager comes into HRLocker and approves or rejects it. Very important for the manager. The manager is coming in here, looking at the who's off calendar to see, okay, well, you know what, Liz is off that, that day, so I don't want to get somebody else off on the same day, so I'm not going to approve that day. So just to kind of making sure that things are covered from a day-to-day basis as well. So that's how the time off. So the employee has full access to their own time off. They're able to see how many days holidays they have. With the time off in lieu, again, we can discuss this with people, is that you can put in different rules that maybe you want it to expire at the end of every month, or maybe you want it to expire after 30 days, or maybe you don't have any expiration. Maybe you just want to manually adjust it for people, and that's okay too. We can talk to you about how that would work for your own company. Obviously, from an employee perspective, from a volunteer perspective, nice to, if you're looking for them to fill in timesheets, it's a nice way to get to see who's been there on the day, so they can just come in here and fill in their Saturday hours that they've done. It won't accrue any time off in lieu because obviously they're not getting paid for it, but it's a nice way to see who was actually there on the day. It doesn't have to be a laborious task. You can either ask them to clock in and out on their mobile phone. There's a free app you can download, or you can ask them just to come in here, or their manager can come in here and type in their hours here as well. So either one would work. Okay. From the time off section, from a volunteer perspective, what you can do is you can roster them on for the days that you want them to work. So you can roster them on. Maybe they're going to be working, Christmas sim or something like that. So maybe they're working the 24th, 25th, 26th of December or whatever it is. And so you can see who's going to be working in the morning, who's going to be working in the afternoon, and the employee will know, the volunteer will know as well when they're going to be when they're going to be helping you guys out. Also, again, really depending on what you like from your volunteers, is that perhaps the volunteer might be, you might want to know when they're going on holiday so that you don't, be ringing everybody. So you can ask them to kind of block out the days that they're not available as well. And you can decide who gets to see that as well. So those two aspects of how you're going to manage people on a day-to-day basis. So I'm just going to look here at any of the questions and answers that we had. Sorry, not the answers, so I'm giving you the question. Just to have a look and see if there's any questions here from people. Okay, so if I look at one question that's in here, is how do you record your Garda vetting? So I think I just showed that to you, but I'll just show it to you again. If I go into the directory here, so you can set this up yourselves. It's here. In regards to each individual employee here, there's the background check here. So you see here the requires background check. So maybe some people in regards to your frontline workers may require background checks and others won't. So you can decide who has to do the background check or not. So maybe if it's only those frontline workers, you wish to tick that box on. If it's not, you just wouldn't tick the box. So maybe your office staff or things like that you wouldn't have to do that. Okay, so I have another question in here is in regards to how to set up the time off in lieu expiration date. So I'm really happy to go through that individually with people, but I'll just have a quick look. I'll do a quick show here. So if you go into settings here, and you can set this up per office. Okay, so we go into head office here, settings, and I'm going to go and soften your time off here. So go into the time off. If I scroll the whole way down here, there's the time off in lieu policy here. So you can decide, first of all, is time off in lieu enabled for this office? And does it expire? So either never expires, it expires in a fixed date, so maybe it expires on the 1st of every month, for example, or maybe it expires after a set length of time. So maybe if I worked up time off in lieu this Friday, it's going to expire in 30 days time, or whatever it is in regards to your own settings. Okay. What I would say is that, you know, with time off in lieu, most of the time people wouldn't have it as an as an overall office setting, but they would go into the individual and kind of set, maybe, you know, time off in lieu wouldn't be applicable for everybody, and maybe only some people get it. The other thing that perhaps might be, you know, of question for people is that, you know, maybe you don't want it to automatically happen, so you can just manually adjust it if you go. Okay. Can I manage hourly employees? So you certainly can. So when you're managing hourly employees here, I'm going to show you this. You can set up different shift patterns for people. So you can set up absolutely however many shift patterns you want. So if we're going to settings here, and this is important when we start to work with companies, we'll go in and ask them, okay, so what work patterns do you have? And most of the time people only say they have 2 or 3. And we're like, no, go back and have a look at what your employees work. And then you'll go see that there's probably somebody who maybe works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you've got somebody who works Monday to Friday, and then you've got somebody who works Monday to Friday, and they have a half day, and a half day on Friday. So we can set up as many different work patterns as you like. So you can put in here the person who works Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example. We'll do a 9 o'clock start to 5:30, and then maybe on a Wednesday they work 9 until, let's say, 12, and on a Friday they work 9 until 4. Okay, and you can open up a work pattern and put as many people on a work pattern as you like. So you don't have to create a work pattern for every single different employee, so you can create as many as you like. So you put in there, and I'm just going to submit that there. So you create that work pattern, and then when you go actually into the individual employees, you can assign that work pattern to them, and that kind of populates the who's off calendar here. I'll just show you that actually while I'm talking about it. If I go into the time off here, this who's off here. So you see here, the grey days are the days that people aren't working. So if you look at John Burke's work pattern here, he works Fridays, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you can see that they work here as well. So you can see the different work patterns that people are on. When you're setting up a volunteer's work pattern, you can decide on whatever works for your own company. So you can either set them as just being a 0 work pattern, so they don't, you know, there's 0 hours that they work, or a nice way you can do it is if somebody's maybe available just on the Friday, you can say, you can put in they said that they're available from 9 to 4:30 on a Friday. And you can just create, that doesn't roster them on for that day, it doesn't fill in their timesheet or anything like that, but it just means that from the volunteer coordinator, you know who's available what days. Okay. So I think that's the last of the questions. Again, if anybody wants to get in contact with myself or anybody from HRLocker, we're delighted to go through anything with you guys. Hopefully you found that useful. So after this, we'll be sending a copy of the webinar out to yourselves, just so that you have a copy of it, as well as we've also recently done a survey in regards to employee burnout, which was quite topical in regards to specifically those frontline workers and non-for-profit sector as well. So interesting stats there as well. And we've also done a really nice podcast with the wheel as well, so we'll put that in as well. But please, if anybody would like to contact us to go through how you can set up your employees and your volunteers within HRLocker, please let us know. So thanks very much, everybody, and take care.